Kale, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Anything good?
Are you? I don't know. There's lots going on.
Yeah.
Lots going on that's good. So
I tell you what, I'm just glad to be back in the office, and I'm gonna be a broken record. This is like the third one. I'm like, my throat.
You've been sick. You know what's
Not
actually
sick.
But you know what's funny?
Allergies.
About that
This
is-
actually was sick.
I know. What's funny is you're healthy. You work out a lot.
Mhm.
You eat right.
Yeah.
And I do none of those things. And you've been sick more than me this year, which is funny.
Well, I've been sick once.
I don't know. Or
Been
isn't
sick
that throat
once.
hurts?
Come on.
Whining
Come
about
on.
it.
Well, hey, I was coming off a trip to Seattle. Lauren's
Yeah.
cousin got married. Lily, who we've known, I've known her since like she was like 1 or 2 years old. So that was pretty damn cool to see.
That is cool.
And beautiful weekend in Seattle, beautiful area, and it was amazing that her and her wife, Caitlin, the vows they put together were like about how they do everything for the other one, like sincerely, both back and forth. And I'm like, damn, like, that's just freaking awesome. I'm going, am I measuring up here on my
My vows aren't
my,
nearly
my
as good.
vows that I did, almost 25 years
Aren't
ago?
yours like yours
It,
were set?
mine are straightforward set. Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, what? You didn't even get a choice. They told you what to say.
Yeah.
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 Do you? Yep.
I do.
Uh-huh.
We do.
Till death do you part. Okay.
Amen.
And you're married. No, it was a beautiful trip, and who knows, traveling today, being out and about, and got some kind of virus that, tested negative for COVID a couple times, but shoot, I could not kick that 100-degree fever. I
Yeah.
mean, it was down the basement, but sometimes it's good to have that where you can just,
There's nothing worse than
Let it go.
fever. You just
Yeah.
sit there and shiver. Oh, it's terrible.
yeah.
But
Yeah, no.
we're glad to have you back. We missed you terribly.
Oh, thank you. You all did, you know what you're doing, though. You got it under control.
Yeah. I didn't even know you weren't here.
Yeah, because I'm a phone call away. That's why I text away.
Maybe.
No, great. Good to be in, and couldn't be more excited to be doing the Vetted Podcast with you today. Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
This is a unique experience.
Yeah, we've got this under control. You're staring down the monitor to make sure everything's working over there,
There's
and
numbers going across the screen and things are happening.
things are happening. That's good.
Which is funny because I know nothing about that.
You just got to.
I know that it looks like it's recording.
It's like seeing the vital signs up in an exam room. Like they're supposed to be moving, right, and making noise. Yeah, it's good.
It's like going to any sort of medical procedure for me where it's like terrifying. All of it's terrifying. And they're like, that's totally fine. I'm like,
That's
just
normal.
because there's a number, it freaks me out. Like, I don't know whether the number is good or bad or otherwise, but it's scary.
Hard to let go.
It is.
Hard to let go. Well, that's why they have trusted partners to work with, and that's what we're talking about. This part 2 here is ownership right for you, or is it in your future? And I think that we talked about before was there's a couple milestones, 3 milestones we work on with clients when they're looking at getting in ownership, getting out of ownership, buying more practices. But really, we've been centering on the practice that is going to become an associate, is going to become the owner. It's a private practice. The owner's like, I want to stay independent. And the associate's like, I want to be independent. So we've been heading down that path. Part 1 talked about all the what you should do beforehand, what you should do before you get to the attorney, other professionals that are out there that are important. But if you think about it, if you were going to, if you had your pet and you take them in and the first person you saw was a cardiologist for just an exam or whatever, it's kind of like, is that the right person to start with?
Right.
So, hey, I think now we're getting to that point. Like we're going to need to think about specialists.
Mhm.
But before we get to that specialist, there's a pretty important thing you need to work on. And Kale, you've got a great agenda here, and I want to let you just start right there with what we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, so when we go through a process, like we said, we have 3 stages. We got the evaluate, and then next up would be the negotiate part. And so there's always like a decision, like I guess not a decision point, but a hard cut line where we've moved forward from the evaluate stage into the negotiate stage, and that's usually based on the LOI, right? So when
And the LOI
LOI stands for letter of
acronym soup.
intent. Letter of intent. It is a generally non-binding document that basically just tells, "Hey, Stephen, I'd like to pursue a deal with you under these terms."
Non-binding, but should allow you to, the owner and you to be like, I'm only looking at you for the next 60 days, each other.
Yeah, if you put the exclusivity clause in it.
Exclusivity, which is important. I mean, owner's not going to go market it out from under you during that time.
Yeah.
Negotiate with other people. They're going to work with you directly. That's the most important part of it.
Yeah. I mean,
not the most, but pretty important.
It's an important piece of it.
And important.
Yeah.
Right.
So, as you look at that, obviously the first thing that most people are going to want to put in there is the purchase price. How much money are we going to spend?
Right.
And there's a number of ways you can put that in there, right? And so I think when people think about a letter of intent, they assume that it has to be a super complicated, really, specified legal document. That really isn't the point. The point is to establish that conversation, to say, hey, we're going to have this conversation. We're going to talk about all these things. And so, if you know the price, that's great. If you've got a valuation done, that's perfect. But you don't have to. You could just say, I would like to pursue this at a fair valuation.
Right.
Whatever we come to.
Yeah.
And so I think the reason that you can leave it a little bit vague is because there's so many things that can go into that purchase price. Because now that you've said, we're going to pursue this, I need to get from you lots of financial statements. I need to get from you lots of information that maybe I've never had access to before.
Right.
To establish, is this practice profitable? Am I buying one that has room for improvement, like a flipping a house or something like that? Not really, but am I buying one that has lots of room for improvement, or am I buying one that's really at functioning highly? And so,
well, you bring that up at the house. Well, are you buying the building with the practice? We don't know those things yet, and we had a valuation recently where we didn't know. Here's the rent. Do we normalize the rent? Is the rent going to be the same for a long time? What's the rent going to be? We don't know some of those things yet. So letter of intent's is going to say we need to figure those things out. So
yeah, absolutely figures those things out. And so as you go in there, I think you have a lot of freedom inside this document. I mean, you can spell out. There's a lot of times deals get done in ways that are unconventional to a point. There's a piece of it that's unconventional, right? Yeah. And so it leaves you a little bit of flexibility to say, I'm going to add this into the letter of intent to maybe sweeten the deal, or to maybe say, hey, here's how I'm going to work through this differently. Yeah. And so, I think they can be as complicated as, 3, 4, 5 pages. They can be as simple as literally one page. Here's right. Some bullet points. Here's some other stuff, and be done.
It's funny. Trip's going to be 15 in August. And last night going to bed, he's like, I'm working on my birthday list. It's kind of what this is. It's kind of like this is a birthday wish list.
This is the wish list. Well, for me, I'd like to buy these things from you at this price.
Yeah, because you're the buyer saying, here's what I wish. Here's what I'd like to think about. And right. Do you agree with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So the purchase price obviously is everybody's biggest thing. But while you're thinking about money, there's a lot of things that can play into that valuation other than just the sheer valuation. It's who's going to finance it, and are you going to go out and get a loan from a bank or from a lender? Are you going to ask the seller to personally finance that practice, which is actually relatively common? I don't know if a lot of people think about that when they're thinking about being an owner, but that is an option that you can ask for,
right? And
a lot of times there's incentives for the owner to do that. So. The other piece, though, is it a stock sale or is it an asset sale? And maybe you can go into some ideas as to both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when people hear stock and asset sale, they immediately think about taxes. And it's what's the best tax advantage? And I think when we start that discussion, we're like, it's not a discussion too much around taxes. If you're an S corporation, maybe a C corporation, it depends how you're incorporated. But for the most part, you can structure a sale, asset or stock, to be pretty darn close tax-wise, for sure. And so, but when you look at it, as you go, the stock sale, you're going to inherit any potential liabilities of the past, are still on you because you are that company still. Or do you want to start your own new company and get going? And out of all the transitions that we've done, getting veterinarians into business, I don't have any, besides maybe one family, right? It was a family business, so that was a stock sale. Other than that, it's been an asset sale because you can use accounting in the way that the veterinary practice works. It doesn't apply to all businesses because all businesses are different as far as what's goodwill, what's inventory, what is it that you're buying, that you're talking about this LOI, what is that comprised of? We know in the veterinary industry, the most valuable thing is the client list. Those people coming through that door, over the 12 to 18 months of clients that are going to come back. There's a pretty darn good chance they're coming back. Mm-hmm. And so with an asset sale, you can use that goodwill, which gets the same tax treatment as the stock sale does. Now, I'm going to think about this. So I think about two things, though, the buyer and the seller tax treatment. And so we're really thinking about the seller side right now. I should preface that is really who I'm thinking about. But on the buyer side, what's really good about an asset sale versus stock sale is not going to have much depreciation. Mm-hmm. So, in year 1 or 2, you may not need a bunch of depreciation because your income may not be high. Maybe it is, but that depreciation can really help with cash flow. And so it's not only just a tax standpoint from day one look, it's a multi-pronged look at the taxes over time. So, man, I can go down the rabbit hole on this one, but really it's twofold. Seller and buyer can have maybe a little bit of the best of both worlds with an asset sale. A stock sale, maybe the seller gets pretty good treatment, mm-hmm. but the buyer may not. It may be disadvantageous for the buyer for stock sale from the tax standpoint and potential liability standpoint too.
Yeah, I think the liability piece is huge.
Yeah.
Especially, if you're buying from a family member or if you're buying from a practice you've worked at for the last 10 years and what's going on there and mm-hmm. maybe what's going on. I don't know that I'd be as scared of a stock sale if that was a deal that was really, favorable for the seller. But mm-hmm. If I don't know what's going on, if that's not somebody that is in my direct, Rolodex of people that I know, like I've only worked here for a little while and I don't really know these people that well.
Yeah.
I just think that there's so much risk that can be involved in that, that it just makes so much sense just do an asset sale and start a new LLC and, mm-hmm. and just buy the assets out of the company.
It's pretty cheap insurance.
Yeah.
To make sure that you just move that along.
Yeah.
For sure. So
there's it costs exactly the same.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
To get all of it done as in an asset sale versus a stock sale. And mm-hmm. so I think that added protection is totally worth it.
Yeah. And what we're getting to really, this jump forwards to the end of the transaction, which is what do you keep mm-hmm. as an owner who's selling that practice? Right. Now, the buyer is going to pay what they're going to pay. But what does the owner keep at the end of the day? That's pretty damn important.
Yeah.
Because if you say $1 million coming your way, you're like, $1 million, then you get hit with taxes and some other things. You might get down to $700,000, $600,000 after it's all said and done, and that might shoot your picture.
Especially if you're structured as a C corp.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're structured as a C corp and get that extra taxation, it could be a big deal.
Big deal. Yeah. C corps can be. Yeah, they're challenging.
Yeah,
they're challenging, and they're a lot. You see those from the '80s. 4 S corps were really known and popular, and S corps make a whole lot of sense. Small businesses now, and so that the most important thing to do though is to have somebody that can spell that out, prove it numerically, and here's what both sides mean and look like, because you should have that done right. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Generally, CPAs can make a pretty fast determination as to what that looks like for most folks.
But some, I don't know. It
depends on your CPA.
Depends on your CPA, because if the CPA is, the question is here: if the CPA has done veterinary transactions, okay. Mm-hmm. The CPA, and some CPAs don't do a lot of business transactions at all. That's the question is too, is like when you talk about specialists, we want CPAs that are familiar with business transactions, not that are just doing just tax returns. There are different kinds. So that's a good qualifier. If someone's out there doing the business transition, it's probably worthwhile to find a specialist in that area, mm-hmm. pay them the money to get the right advice and solution. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Another thing that a lot of people put in there, and I think is largely important, confidentiality clause. That's, hey, Steven, you're going to share a lot of personal stuff with me.
Yeah.
because all business is personal. So you're going to tell me exactly how much money you've made for quite a while.
Right.
And so, in return, I'm going to promise you that that's not going to make it to any hands that are not material to the deal going through. And so I think that's a huge piece to have in there, especially if I'm buying from my parents or something like that. It's a little different, but it's still, I would say even if you are buying from your parents, you still probably should do all the same things the exact same way.
It's a business transaction.
It's a business transaction at this point. It's not, I'm buying dad's truck or something like that. There's a pretty large difference between the two.
Yes.
What contingencies should you put in there?
Well, obviously financing.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's a huge deal, is to make sure you can get lending. You don't want to be on the hook for all that money and you can't get it. It's going to be a mess. The other one is that we talked about earlier, but that real estate piece is, are you buying it, you leasing it, and what that rate is. And I think we get in arguments around here about a normalized lease rate in the veterinary industry is 6% of revenue for the most part. Averaged out across the country, most places are paying about 6% of their revenue on their lease. It varies. I mean, we've got someone that's done 2%, we've got someone that's done 8, 9, 10%. Location matters and various other things matter, but you need to have a understanding what your lease is going to be, because two things. One, that affects your lendability with the bank. And then the other thing is that affects the value of your practice, because inside the numbers, you're paying rent out of those numbers, and that's got to prove itself out to the valuation. That's either going to hold constant, or what is it going to be? You got to prove that out. So contingencies are, one is definitely the finance. Two is the looking at the rental, the lease, what's going to happen there, being able to solve that. And real important, how many doctors are working there? Are you going to get contracts with those doctors?
Yep.
And that's the biggest cash flow issue right there. You've got to have contracts with existing doctors or guarantees they're going to work there, and figure that out, because if a doctor leaves after you buy that practice, if it's a multiple doctor practice, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. And we've had that where, not leaving, but we've had a doctor that was selling the practice that had a stroke and changed the whole dynamics of that. And we had to go back to the drawing board and agree upon what's a new value. They hadn't signed on. Imagine if they had signed the deal and moved forward, and then that happens. Man, it's all things you got to check. But I think the top lines that I see are going to be that finance, the rent, and then doctor contracts.
Yeah, and I think another thing to think about is, obviously, how much do we want the selling owner? Usually, it's still a practicing veterinarian. How much do we want them to work? And how much do they want to still work?
Right.
I mean, some people, really still want to be there. They're just tired of owning.
Yeah.
And so, that's a piece that has to be discussed. And a lot of times you would know that, because that's kind of a common question that you would discuss. It's like, hey, how long do you want to work? And they're like, I don't know, a few more years. So then you can, put that in there. But, I think it's definitely a piece to spell out. Do they have a contract? Do they have a non-compete contract? Depends on how well you know the person.
Yeah.
To make sure that they're not going to go, just work for their buddy down the road, or if they've been friends a while.
Yep.
So there's lots of things to think about the selling doctor too.
Kales, we talk through this too, and we're talking about private practice sales, which the multiples on the numbers that you're going to come to valuation on are lower than what some corporations are going to do. Now, the thing about the corporations, though, is that what people don't realize is that corporations on those numbers are going to have earnouts, and they might give you company stock or what they currently have. So you actually might get a multiple less in your hand than you would have on a private transaction. And so I think that's important as you look at those contingencies with, as we talk through this, something else bubbles in my mind why independent sales make sense, because the ones we do, you get the number. If it's $1 million sale, it's $1 million you're going to get. There's not typically, too many other things wrapped into that number based on earnouts or proving revenue and all those kinds of things like a corporation would buying you. So, I don't know, brought up another point. It's a little sidebar there, but man, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's also there's ways earnouts would make sense in a private transaction. I mean, I think there's, I wouldn't throw it out.
You can't throw it out. No, because it could be a question on the current owner, or
maybe there was a situation where I'm trying to make something. He had a procedure done. They had a procedure done.
Yeah.
And
health concerns.
It had to be out for 3 months. It's like, okay, we're going to hold back a certain amount of money, 20% of the sale, to make sure on a 12-month basis that revenue stays the way we think it's going to be.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You could do it like that.
Yeah.
So there's reasons that you could use an earn out to say, in 12 months, if revenue's this, the way we expect it to be, I'll pay you the rest.
Yeah.
Something like that.
No, you that could be one to put in their contingency.
Yeah, certainly is revenue going to hit, and you can do that on a trailing 12-month. You can just set the number. I want it to hit this number. You can, many different ways you can structure that.
Yeah.
And so again, you talked about non-binding in the very beginning.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean? Because we have this.
Yeah, people are like, I signed something.
I signed this.
I signed this.
Yeah.
So non-binding means that you're not obligated to buy the practice. The contingencies we talked about earlier aren't necessarily helping you out on the LOI, because you can just let the LOI drop. You don't have to buy the practice. You don't have to do anything. But what that does is helps you contemplate for a binding agreement. The purchase agreement is what we're moving towards. So in this one here, we're simply just, most people in the veterinary space are honorable people, trustworthy people. And a signature, so really the binding is I've kind of already made this promise. Although it's not binding in a document, I believe in the direction I'm headed, so that means a lot to people in the business world. And that's a good faith.
Yeah, it's a gesture of good faith and saying, hey, these are the parameters that we'll both mutually work towards. And if if one of these can't happen, that's fine. We'll move on. But, all these things staying equal, we're a go. We're a green light.
Yep. What I like about it, too, is it allows you some more breathing room, you and the owner, for the next 30 to 60 or 90 days for some more due diligence. And that way you're not feeling as, I guess it's kind of still dating.
You're still dating.
We haven't engaged. It's not an engagement yet either, right? It's like, I'm thinking about buying a ring for you.
Yeah.
If
I bought a ring, would you say yes?
What kind of rings are you? Would you say yes? And what kind of rings are you thinking
that?
about? And even when you buy the ring, even though you're gonna do this, you still got to ask the question, and the other person's got to say yes. So I think the non-binding is really we're in that, be like, I haven't bought the ring yet.
Right. This is just
the
us
ring's not on the finger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is us agreeing that we're going to move forward, and man, that exclusivity clause is important too.
That exclusivity clause is a big deal, because that's the biggest part of the good faith in it. Is that I'm not going to go out to this other person over here and be like, hey, I got an offer for $1 million.
Would you do one too? Yeah. So, and that's saying both ways too. It's not like if I'm trying to buy your practice, I'm also not trying to buy their practice at the same time to see whose deal I can get better.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's it really this is just a gesture of good faith and establishing kind of in a formal way, we're doing this.
What are you seeing? How many pages on average?
Oh, less than 2.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
one would be ideal.
One's fine.
It just depends on the complexity of the practice.
Yeah, it depends on the complexity of the deal, and it seems like the letters of intent seem to get, I don't know, they get longer with the more qualitative things you're working towards,
right,
than the quantitative. Because quantitative is easy. You can just state it. Yeah. But the qualitative, there's like further conversations about X, and we need to agree on this, and there's things like that make that more complicated. But
nuance.
Yeah, I mean, really, in all honesty, like if I was going to send you a letter of intent, I would probably have a paragraph that just says, hey, this is a letter of intent that specifies my intentions, and then have some bullet points of the deal of the way that I understand it and the way I would like to move forward, and then maybe a closing paragraph that just says, X amount of time that I'd like to close, something like that. It'd be very simple.
Yeah.
Page.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing super important about it.
Yeah. You got on here about legal representation. Before you sign something, you should double check that it's...
You should read it.
Let's read it.
Yeah.
And make sure it's good, and get some legal eyes on it to be like, yeah, that's non-binding.
Right. Yeah, to make sure that it is 100% non-binding. If both of you are on good terms, there's no reason that you can't use the same attorney to a point. You know, it's like, hey, just make this fair for both people.
Right.
And attorneys will do that. If you approach them that way and say, hey, we're both here together. We want this deal to go through. I'm not trying to screw him. You're not trying to screw me.
Yeah.
And can you just get us documentation that reflects that?
Right.
And that's a possibility. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times people are trying to, who's representing who and all that stuff. And I think it is nice when you can finally just get somebody that is representing the deal as a whole.
It'll save you time and energy.
Yeah.
For sure.
And a lot of times it's like, hey, here's very boilerplate language that just says what we're going to do. And both of you sign it and move on. It's
if
great.
someone's not we have that in our house. If someone's not working with us, they need that. They do need that. That's an important piece.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Have we hammered on the LOI?
I think we've kind of knocked out the LOI.
So we've got it signed. Associates signed it. Sellers have signed it. And that, again, make sure, when I say sellers, who owns the business? Make sure everybody's in agreement. The person selling it can represent the members of the business, or do they both need partners on it? All the people need to sign it should sign it.
Absolutely.
That's an important part.
Yep. So, once that's happened, it's we've got to hammer out the terms.
Yeah.
And start finalizing what those legal documents are going to be. What legal documents do we even need? All those other questions, which will probably be our next episode.
Well, yeah, and I think that as I think about going through this as we sign that, you got to dive deeper in. The question is the contracts that are on equipment, supplier contracts, what's out there too, because I think those are how do you get behind the scenes to see how you got that signed, you got that confidentiality agreement. You talked about getting into the file cabinet, and now it's time to get.
It's time to get in the file cabinet and see what's out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at some point you're gonna have to sign a contract that says I have no other existing obligations.
Yeah.
And so no one's generally gonna lie to you about that. It's like, hey, I've got an IDEX
but they may
contract.
not know.
They may not know that
they
signed it.
Sometimes they're like, I signed one, I don't know, 3 years ago. Is it still good?
Yeah. Is it still valid? Is it going to carry over to you? I know the IDEX contracts have been interesting.
Well, and some other like Antex, Baxis, I've seen contracts where the prior owner gets a bill from that company because, like, you said you would buy this much over the next 18 months. You're halfway through 18 months, you owe us this much dollars. There's no teeth in that generally. We have helped to get rid of those. That's pretty brash to send someone that sold their business this deal. And that gets into why do you want an asset sale versus a stock sale? Because if you buy that stock, you are obligated to that contract. If you missed it, because it can happen, you think you've got it all figured out, but there's a contract out there that you've missed potentially.
Yep.
You bought that contract. If you get an asset sale and you identify the contracts that you are buying, the transferability of those, then you're good. You list those out. We had one on people were mailing stuff, I forget the name of the deal that stamped it, but like $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And they got a claim on that they owed that money, and we sent them the contract saying they didn't buy that machine. And by the way, former doctor is no longer living. Or not, sorry, the former doctor's spouse who managed the practice that signed that is no longer living. You do with it what you want, and that went away.
Yeah.
But there's things that are out there. But it freaks you out when you get it.
Yeah. And
that's not comfortable.
No, you don't want that.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're not bad contracts. They're just forgotten about.
Yes.
And they not the fault of the company or anybody.
Postage machine.
Yeah.
I mean.
It's exactly what it is.
That was from a long time ago, and people are emailing bills out now.
Right.
Or hopefully collecting payment
Hopefully
at time of
ACH.
service.
Yeah.
Collect payment at time of service.
Yeah.
So you don't have to mail out your bills.
Yeah, just running the credit card right at the front and not doing anything.
Yeah, credit cards. Yeah, what are you gonna do? I mean, we're going to get into all those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's part of the closing procedures too. Is like there's a million and one things you got to make sure are right. To open the door, even though it's the same business, same team, probably is going to walk in the door on Monday after we close.
Yeah,
it's a completely new entity now.
Yeah,
all kinds of new things that have to be set up and ready to go by that the close date.
Yeah.
So,
what do you if you look at over the past 10 years of putting these together, we continue to add and improve, and it's pretty cool to aggregate more experiences and to find out we've got a pretty. I don't think has anything surprised us recently though.
No, I've not had anything that's been terribly surprising. I've had like hiccups, but generally that's just with like state agencies, not timing wise, not being
Yeah.
the thing that always is a pain is the unemployment number, because
Mhm.
they don't want to give it to you until you owe it.
Yeah.
But I also can't pay people through QuickBooks until I have it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what the heck do we do? That's the only thing that just irritates me is like, why can't I? Why can't you just give it to me before I owe it? Because I'm telling you that I'm going to owe it here in like a week. Like,
That's what James talked about with the sales tax.
yeah.
The sales tax, like you don't have you don't have your occupancy, you're at this and that yet. And like I haven't opened it, haven't bought it, but I need it because you say it takes 30 days to get. And if I need, how could I possibly open and operate?
Yeah.
You have to make a few phone calls.
It's a pain.
Yeah.
But it's just one of the things that, we know that we got to look out for it. So we wrap it into the process.
If we be gentle here and assume, be caring, right, that maybe there's a reason they do that because they'd be flooded with, I don't know, requests. Who knows?
It's the way they
There's
do it.
something. Something happened along the way. There's a reason.
There's a reason that it happens the way it happens, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It is fun though to be like, we've built into the process, this many days out, these
Right.
things have to be done.
Right.
And, that way, hopefully on opening day, there's always going to be something. There's always going to be something that falls
Yeah.
through the cracks, and it's probably something really small, because the big things are going to be covered most of the time. But I get 98% of it is important.
You had a recent one. It wasn't that it was what the surprise was the supplier, a distributor, if
Yeah.
you will, that on a practice that made a statement about shutting them off because they didn't think something was right.
Yeah, and so it just takes phone calls to
Yeah.
fix some of those things. Yeah, it being very explicitly clear in what's going on, and sometimes people aren't going to understand things, and that's okay. And just because somebody on the phone tells you something doesn't mean that's true.
Right.
Doesn't mean that's the case.
Right.
You're not the expert in the room.
Yeah.
So never any reason to freak out just because somebody on the phone tells you something randomly when they don't know all the facts of the story. So yeah, there's always going to be some form of a hiccup, but it's
surprise was like that person was wrong. We were surprised how they handled
how they handled
with the business owner.
Yeah, being so wildly incorrect, and then just never following up again. About things. Yeah,
good way to tarnish your name.
Yeah, certainly. So, anyway, there's a million things you can put in these. I think my whole point to even talking about the LOI is it is because it's the beginning of the formal part of the negotiation, and to tell people that you have the ability to be creative. It does not. I know when you start talking about legal documents and things that you start to think that it has to get real complicated and it has to sound like it was written in legalese and you don't really understand any word in it. The letter of intent doesn't have to be that way.
No,
there's language in other documents that does have to be that way.
But it's a wish list.
It's a wish list. It's like, hey, Steven,
Yeah.
I'd like to do these things. Are you cool with that? And if so, let's both sign it.
Yeah.
And so, you can write it yourself if you want to. I would still probably get an opinion on it, but
Right.
you can come with a draft and just say, hey, here's what I'd like to do.
It is getting you the outline for your asset purchase agreement. Because let's talk about asset purchase agreement. Most people are doing, most people should do. It's an outline. It's a lot easier to start with that versus an asset purchase agreement. Because then you can take each one of those and pluck it into the asset purchase agreement to where it needs to go properly and make sense out of it then.
Absolutely. So, I don't know. Do we feel like we've
we're in milestone 2. Letter of intent going out, thinking about all those things. We should be identifying legal representation. Can we share a lawyer? Do we need 2 lawyers? What's comfortability? And if whatever's comfortability for the individual, and then of course, are we the lending? Starting to identify that. Do we need to bring banks in? Is it personal finance? I think what's interesting, if you think about bankability, is in this area in milestone 2. And if I think about it, I do want to talk a little bit about that because it depends on the risk of the practice, and the bankability of the practice depends on what rate you're going to get too. So as we go through it, you can see, you're going to be able to go to one of the major banks that has one of the lower rates and that understands the veterinary community. And that's something that I think that's one thing that we do, we don't struggle with, but we get where someone's like, well, so-and-so is my local banker. And the issue is on the bankability side is that local banks, do they understand the assets of a veterinary practice. And most banks that are local tend to lend on hard assets, inventory, right, equipment, a building. But to go to them and go, well, 75% of the value of this purchase is in this client list over here. It's going to generate this that has proven over time that it will. That can be a hard sale. But there's enough good lenders out there that will be able to walk you through and get you a really good rate and do that. Not to say we shouldn't give that bank a chance. We just want to set expectations to be like, hey, we believe in, as we talk about believing in privately owned practices, independently privately owned banks, if we can work with them, great. But a lot of times it can be difficult to work with a local bank unless you are willing to collateralize other things, if you have enough collateral outside of it.
The flexibility of some of the larger banks too is where you see the real difference. It's like, maybe we could structure it this way, and they try that. Yeah, it's not a hard, fast. This is what we can do, and which is fine. I'm not knocking any of the local banks because they serve a definite need. But there's definitely a point of complexity where it makes sense to go to a much larger lending institution to make sure that your needs are met and you can do things in a creative way that they're used to doing because they do these things a lot. They're used to the size and complexity and what's going on in the space, and a lot of times that does make sense.
Oh, it does, and so I think that's a real important part is to have someone that can help you navigate. The attorneys, make sure the attorney's qualified for this kind of deal. Make sure CPA's qualified for this kind of deal. The lender is, and as we continue to dial, get into those things, then you will get into that. You talk about that closing part, milestone 3, where we do tune the details. Where we do get down to dotting the I's, crossing the T's. That's the devil in the detail, right? The devil's in the detail. And if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, the devil will get you every time.
They will.
Which is important. And make sure you get that right because it's one of the largest things transaction-wise you will do as a buyer and as a seller. So let's get this thing right and let's make sure that the legacy's intact. I think that's as we go through this, that's the big part. The legacy's intact for the former owner and that the business continuity is there for the staff, the team, and that quality of care that you've got to enjoy is still happening, and that you can go through into that ownership phase fully confident and ready to be the new owner and build the practice to your vision now from there on out. So a big part of it. Yeah. No, what more, Kale?
I think we've pretty well finished up on what we would consider to be our second phase here.
Got the LOI.
Got the LOI out.
We've got our we're kind of confidentiality agreement, right? We're not gonna go out and talk about this. That's a big part of it. It is because transitions can stir questions. So sometimes when these happen at the end, new owner, people don't even know there's a new owner. They sometimes ask for the old owner still. And sometimes it's fun, like, okay, yeah, I can go get Dr. So-and-so and bring him on out.
Or they say it to you. Actually, I am the owner.
Yeah.
So that would be fun.
Yeah, that works out that way, right?
Yep.
Exclusivity. It's just going to be us dealing on this. That's important. And so, yeah, we're building that framework so we can actually put together an asset purchase agreement and buy this thing and move on to milestone 3. So very important to make sure that what we're walking you through is not putting the cart before the horse here and making sure that once you got that cart hitched up, the right people are in the seats on the cart, I guess, right? So I went that direction. People on the bus are in the right seats. So, no, great. Look forward to diving into the next part of this about negotiating that, fine details, all that kind of stuff. So, Kale, great to be back in the office today.
Yeah, good to have you back.
And look forward to our next episode together. As always, thanks for watching, listening on all the channels out there. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Vetted Podcast. And if you got anything you think that you would like to see us talk about, go ahead and do it on Facebook, Instagram, and check our website out, thevettedpodcast.com, where you can contact us with your ideas, thoughts, and likes. Thank you so much.
Peace and blessings.
Adios.